Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, that's everything you need to know about me. What the aim of this podcast is, though, is to tell the stories of films. And I tend to talk about production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all sorts of bits and bobs, really. Basically, the things that go and make the films that we know and sometimes love, just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. This particular episode of Film Stories is one of my special episodes where I bring in a filmmaker to talk about their work and their body of work and basically how they've gone about getting to where they are now. And I'm really delighted to welcome back to the podcast Sarah Smith. Now, I spoke to Sarah a few episodes ago now when the film Ron's Gone Wrong was released in cinemas. The first film from Britain's latest major digital animation studio, Locksmith Animation, a company that Sarah set up along with Julie Lockhart. And Ron's Gone Wrong has took a long time to get to the screen. And so around the time of the film's release, I was lucky enough to be joined by Sarah and the filmmakers, and we went through the story of realising that. What this episode is just a little bit different. We're going to talk about Ron's Gone Wrong a lot. I really like the film an awful lot, and I should point out it's now available on Disney+. It's coming out on DVD and Blu-ray, just as this podcast is being released as well. But we dig a lot more into Sarah's story here, right back to how she ended up at Aardman Animation, how she ended up directing Arthur Christmas when she was at Aardman, and basically the journey that took her from her early comedy work through to setting up, along with Julie Lockhart, Locksmith, this incredibly bold animation studio that's based in the UK and trying to go toe-to-toe with the likes of Pixar and companies of that ilk. So, Sarah is very candid in this conversation, for which I hugely appreciate. She does also drop in a few names, and I do as well, and we talk about a few things. So, just a few notes just to prepare you for this. We mentioned Peter Baynham. Now, Peter Baynham is a writer, Oscar-nominated writer for his work on Borat, but co-wrote Arthur Christmas with Sarah, co-wrote Ron's Gone Wrong, and a long-time writing partner and a film partner, really, of Sarah Smith. Liz is Elizabeth Murdoch, who was one of the people instrumental in the founding of Locksmith Animation and is one of the people heading up that company now. Sarah then mentions the film Lost in La Mancha, which is the film, an extraordinary documentary on the attempt of Terry Gilliam to make the film The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, which he did ultimately make, but the 2002 film Lost in La Mancha details a far less successful attempt to bring that to the screen. Jeffrey Katzenberg's name is mentioned. Jeffrey Katzenberg was heading up DreamWorks Animation, who did a deal with Aardman while Sarah was there. DreamWorks and Aardman partnered on 3 films in the end. It was supposed to be 5, but it was ultimately 3, the last of which we briefly touch on was Flushed Away. I think that's enough notes to set you up, though, because I think most of this conversation really speaks for itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play you a clip from Ron's Gone Wrong, and I do hugely recommend the movie, and then we'll come into the story the other side of this.
How do I make friends for Barney?
Seriously? You share stuff about him, like pictures of his food or his wake-up routine. You search for people who know him or like the same stuff as him. You show them pictures, and then you get comments, and then you get people that like him, and then you get friend invites. Boom, now he has friends. Duh.
Ron, we have to go.
Does Barney need friends?
Well, yeah. Or, fun fact, he will not survive middle school.
Savannah, please don't tell anyone. I'm not supposed to have him. He has to be a secret.
Give it here!
That Bebot is ours.
It's a lunatic!
It's just dancing. I taught
I
it.
paid for that.
I was just doing what I said.
Take it away! That's crazy!
At least I'm not Uncle Boris.
I'm sure it's just a minor issue.
It's violent, uncontrollable, and highly dangerous!
Okay, great. Let me look into that.
No, there's nothing wrong with him.
It assaulted a child!
It didn't assault him.
I hit Rich Belcher. It was awesome but terrible but awesome.
See?
Barney, you were fighting?
No, B-bots are incapable of violence.
Officer down!
So that was a clip from Ron's Gone Wrong, and I'm delighted to be joined for the second time on this podcast by its co-director, its co-writer, and many other hats as well, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Hey, Simon. Nice to see you.
Your story, I've been following since back in the Den of Geek days, where I was there for an awful long time, and we first spoke on Arthur Christmas, but there was always a little bit before that I never really got to with you, which is, and don't take this in the wrong way, how on earth, given your background, did you end up in animation? Because your background was writing an awful lot of really edgy and being involved with an awful lot of edgy comedy shows.
Yeah, I was basically a writer, producer, director in British comedy. In fact, going all the way back to being a tiny child, I went to university at Oxford and I fell into the Oxford Review because it was the first thing that I went and auditioned for. I saw a notice for auditions and I wanted to be a serious theatre director. And I saw an audition for the Review and I went along and I got in and I was in it for about a year. I'm honestly not very good as a performer, but anyway, they did ask me then to take it over and run it and be the president, and that's how I met Armando Iannucci. And afterwards I then went off and I did do a little bit of theatre for a while, regional theatre, but Armando went off to BBC Comedy, so I kind of saw that as a potential career path. And so when a job came up in radio entertainment, I applied and ended up being a comedy producer, first in radio, then in television, and then writing and directing as I went along. And I did that for like 10 years. I did things like League of Gentlemen and Fist of Fun with Stuart Lee, Richard Herring, and then all of the Armistice series with Armando. I did League of Gentlemen on radio, then on television. So lots of kind of dark, dodgy, edgy.
Well, yes, I think you can sort of get where I'm coming from.
I guess what you mean. I see what you mean. And then the first time, and Pete Bainham and I worked together right from the very beginning on a lot of those. The very, very first thing that either of us did as an original show was a radio series called The Harpoon that we did together. Yeah. And so we worked together, him in various different, roles as a performer, writer, me as a producer, director. And then he asked me to help him write something. And that was I Am Not an Animal. It was the first time we'd done animation. In fact, I did a little bit of script writing on another thing, but that was the first real sort of, big animation thing we took on with Julia Davis and Simon Pegg and Steve Coogan and so on. And it was completely nuts. It had a budget to be 5 characters in one set, but as soon as I joined, I went, yeah, but what if they escape? And then they had to spread the budget over lots and lots of different things. So the animation was a little it was a little stretched financially, but I'm proud of it because it was funny. And it was the first time we'd ever written together. And then I was in the middle of directing a series called Thin Ice up in Whitley Bay. And it was really, really cold. I remember the designer saying to me, have you ever seen Lost in La Mancha? Because it was like one of these productions in which like everything went wrong. Literally, the power broke down and the ice rink started melting at one point. And I couldn't skate. There was another one. And you couldn't hear yourself because it was so echoey beyond about 3 feet away. And it was like an anxiety dream where I was standing in the middle of an ice rink that was melting with 30 children in penguin costumes, completely ignoring me, trying to direct something. It was so miserable. And I remember getting a call and going into the urine-soaked men's hockey changing rooms.
Nice.
And it was a call from Aardman Animation, and they asked me if I would be interested in applying for this job to head up their development team. A few years earlier, I'd been in touch with them about when they were looking for some script editing work, mostly because, Aardman are national treasures, right? We all love Aardman. Yeah. And I'd never in the end done anything with them, but they kept me on file and asked me if I'd apply for this job. And I thought, well, that's not really what I do. I don't want to do development. I'm a director, I'm doing drama now, and that sounds fun. Nonetheless, it was really cold doing that series and really tough. And I thought, well, in the end, I said to Aardman, I'll come for 6 months. And I thought maybe I'll just create a relationship with them, and then that'll be another kind of work that I could do in the future, maybe developing the odd project. And I just got totally sucked into their crazy world. And I spent the first year there developing a whole new slate because they were coming out of the DreamWorks relationship. I used to go on every week. I can say this because he's a friend now, but every week I used to meet Bill Damashki, who was at DreamWorks, and he would go, "Have you got any ideas?" And I'd be like, "No, still not got any ideas, Bill," because we both knew that I was developing a slate for them beyond the DreamWorks relationship.
Yeah.
And I put together the Pirates movie that Pete Lord then decided he wanted to direct, and because he wanted to direct that, he then asked me if I'd take over as creative director of features. And so that was the point at which I was supposed to be going back to my comedy life. But I kind of thought there are no other jobs like that in this country, to be the creative director of a studio like that, you know, to making films. And it was just it was super fun. It was crazy. Within 2 weeks of arriving at Aardman, I was sitting at a round table with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and you get catapulted into this kind of level of Hollywood through animation, which is kind of fun and not that easily accessible to a lot of the British film industry. So it was, and I fell in love with animation as an art form. And then I started making Arthur Christmas. I said to them, look, I want to make this film. So I moved away from being development and creative director and became the director again, because Pete and I wrote it together. So it became very personal to me. And that's how I became, and they forgot to say no. Someone should have said, what are you talking about? You don't know animation. But they forgot. So I took on Arthur. And I fell so in love with the world, with the people, with the artists, with the art form, the imagery, you know, the mixture of visual as well as words and comedy. And I think crucially, Pete and I had our first children in that time when we were writing Arthur.
That.
You know, we both left it ridiculously late to have babies, and he met his partner when he went out to do Borat, and met Sarah, and then they had a child, and then I also got pregnant just at the beginning of Arthur Christmas, and so his first child's about 1.5 years older than mine. But as a result, animation becomes something else. Animated movies are the things you share with your kid, right? They are the art form that you share with your kid, and that becomes massively important. So not only did I love the art form and the people, but I also felt these are the things that there's nothing more important to me than making the kind of work that I want to share with my kid, stories that mean something. And you know, to say something very personal as well, you know, I came back from Arthur Christmas and I decided I wanted to raise my kid here, and I felt like I love the creative community of London. So I started trying to raise the money for a studio. And when we started, within 9 months of starting, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so that was a really complicated time for me, and because the studio had only just started up, right? And that was very complicated. But also I had a 4-year-old, and I was a single parent of a 4-year-old child. And the movies became even more important to me. I really thought of it as a message in a bottle, as putting things in that you want your kid to know if you're not there. And that became really poignant and meaningful for me at that time. So it was a very long answer, Simon, but you had the whole history right there.
That's I mean, it's really, I mean, the most important question is, how is your health now?
Well, you know, it is, unfortunately, breast cancer diagnosis is a thing that never goes away. And I had a very rough ride, and I had quite an advanced sort of diagnosis, but I'm in remission. And unfortunately, the risk of it coming back goes on. I read an article the other day saying for 30 years. So it never is, it's never gone. But I'm okay right now. And actually, honestly, that's one of the things you learn, is that okay right now is all of us that any of us ever have, right? Being okay right. Nobody knows anything about what's going to happen tomorrow. You know, I may have a high-risk cancer diagnosis. You could be run over by the proverbial bus. You know, we just have now, right? And that's the hard lesson that you learn.
I'm very glad you exist, if I can just say that.
Bless you, that's a sweet thing to say.
I mean, it's true. I mean, even before you just dropped that into the conversation, I had a list of notes where my conclusion of you is you just don't do it the easy way. Because
you're absolutely right, and other people have said that to me, and I haven't. That is not a choice. I don't.
No, well, I don't see how it could be a choice.
I do obviously choose the. I don't mean to, Simon, but somehow you're right. I have climbed every blooming mountain the difficult way. My big advice is, if you want to start a studio or any form of startup, don't do it in your mid-late 40s, because you know you are being both a parent and also I was looking after my own parents, and that's when you have. Someone said to me the other day, this is called, medics call this sniper alley, which is when you run at high risk of all sorts of illnesses catching up with you, you know. And really, startups are for like 25-year-olds.
Yes, I sort of learnt this the hard way as well, though not to that extreme. It's just like I quit Den of Geek without a job to go to, just on point of principle, really. And roughly the same age, but not quite the same adventure that you've had, really. But I look even at that little period you were at Aardman, because I've been around Aardman a couple of times. The place fascinates me. That period 2006 2009. When you were in the midst of developing, that was the bit where Flushed Away was causing all sorts of ructions, if memory serves. And I think you had to present the slate to Amy Pascal at Sony.
I did. Right? I had to persuade. So this was like after I'd been there for about. So the Flushed Away kind of was the end of the last film in the relationship with Aardman, and then I had to create a new slate. And, you know, at the end of my first year there, it was time to try and find a new partner for the studio. And I remember saying to someone, what do people do in film pitches? Because I've literally never seen anyone pitch a film before. So I had put together my own presentations of what I wanted to show. I had visual material. I had kind of, you know, ripomatics. I had some art. I had stories to tell. You know, I had just done what I felt was the best way to excite them. But I suddenly worried that I might be doing everything wrong. And they were like, oh, it'll be fine. And then we had this hilarious experience. We were in Aztec West, which is like a business park on the edge of Bristol, right?
Yeah.
But Aardman, and they have like Academy Awards to their name. So all these kind of heads of studios flew in there. We had like the guy that at that time was the owner of Cafe. He flew in, you know, on his private jet to a little airfield and come to Aztec West Business Park. That one didn't go so well because I think that the canteen provided sandwiches, and he was this very rich French guy, and we realized that we had just not catered at the right level. So we got that right after that. And then we had Donna Langley came in as well, flew in on a jet to come and see the slate. And in fact, that looked like it was going to be the deal, was the Donna Langley deal. And then at the last minute, Michael Linton and Amy Pascal flew in on their private jet, came out to West, and I presented the slate, and they were like, we want to do a deal straight away. So obviously my pitch, I still do the same kind of pitches now, and to be honest, fine, but I didn't know if it was the time.
I went to Aardman's premises once, and there's a little sandwich van that just tootles around outside, isn't there? Is that what you were feeding the heads of Hollywood studios?
No, I promise you it was from their own catering. But even
is that right?
But you know what, Simon? I'd love to take credit for my amazing slate, and I think it was a great slate, and I'm proud of what we did, but the truth is, at the end of the presentation, you know, we had this whole sort of 3 hours mapped out. We would take them down onto the studio floor, and they'd set up some of the sets and characters from like Chicken Run and things.
Yeah.
And honestly, we should have just done that bit and then gone sign here, because they all go around going, oh my God, look at the look at the, which is fair enough because it's like magic down on the studio floor, you know. So really, Aardman sells itself, but.
The thing that struck me from the couple of times we've spoken in the past is that there's just, I've always got a sense of a real moral core to the stuff that you do, and that struck me too as being very much at the heart of what you wanted to set up when you decided to start Locksmith Animation. And I was intrigued as much by what that wasn't as what it was, because I was reporting on British animated films. It's just like Rocket Pictures would make Romeo and Juliet and would outsource it to Canada for the actual animation. And no one was doing what you were trying to do. No one was trying to do this in the middle of the UK, not outsource the work overseas, be a magnet for talent into the UK, and just kind of put the flag in and just say, no, we can try and go toe-to-toe with a Pixar and a Disney. The barriers for what you were trying to do also just look ginormous. And I just wonder if you can take me into that entry point of why you decided to do Locksmith, and then the period of time between you deciding to do that and being able to announce a first film, because that's the quiet bit I don't think we know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think honestly, the you know, and I'm everything you said is fantastic and is also true. And I did feel strongly about all of those things, but also just to put a very simple and selfish slant on it, you know, I wanted to create the kind of environment in which I want to work. Yeah. And I felt that, you know, I just couldn't see myself in, I think it's really, really changed now. You have to see that the landscape is very, very different. At that time, it was very dominated by the major 4 or 5 studios out in the States. who were all very corporately owned and had quite a strong agenda of the kind of things that they did. And, you know, I worked for 10 years for the BBC. I'm quite maverick. You know, I like more independent worlds. And I couldn't see myself in any of those big US studios. And yet I'd fallen in love with animation. I also love the UK. I wanted to raise a child in England, not in LA. And I don't really like LA, to be honest. I mean, I love it as a place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. And, you know, for all those reasons, I wanted to be back in the UK. And therefore, it was like, how am I going to do this? And so to some extent, I was trying to create what I thought was the dream version for creative people at that point, right? Because, you know, other companies, as I say, were much bigger. They were owned by their corporations, you know, and I thought, you know, creatives like what people used to, every now and then someone would come and visit me. A bunch of animators and people came who were part of the early days of Pixar, and they said to me, this is how it felt at the beginning. And I always used to like punch the air, because that's what I wanted, that excitement and energy of being your own thing. And I feel that what I felt from Arthur Christmas is that because we did the first half of the movie in the UK, we didn't have anyone to refer to but ourselves. And therefore, you're not borrowing from other kinds of movies. You're following your own best instincts. And we had the freedom to do it because we were a long way away from distributors who could drop in every week and give you notes. And it just gave us the thinking time, not that you don't want the notes, but it gave us the creative thinking time to get the thought out and make it feel right, you know? And so all of those things felt to me so precious. We had such a lovely time in Bristol on the first half of Arthur Christmas. And I wanted to recreate that atmosphere, really. And then everything else was me kind of analysing what had I learned about the industry? What did I think was best practice? I look at Pixar, they sit with their animators, they don't outsource, you know? The best movies to me come from the place where you have that collaborative team together. And like in every respect, I was looking at what feels like the smartest model that there is. And, you know, that became, I downloaded How to Write a Business Plan from Barclay's website. I kept saying to people, show me a business plan. I don't know what it's supposed to look like. And in the end, I just wrote a sort of 150-page Bible of everything that I had learned, that I thought this is the best way to go about development. This is the best way to do it. And I persuaded Julie to get involved, although she was still at Aardman at the time. But, you know, we just talked it out. What's the smart model, the timelines? What does it look like? And then I kind of found people in the industry in the UK. I was really supported by some great people like Tessa Ross. I went to see David Heyman and Barbara Broccoli, the sort of grown-ups in the British film industry, to get advice. And eventually I found someone who helped me turn the business plan into something presentable and taught me how to present a deck and stuff I'd never done before. And we kind of went out, you know, marching the streets looking for investment. And then, you know, when the company started, finally, I was there on my own to start with because Julie was still finishing Shaun the Sheep, and we started a development slate. And my aim was to have 4 things, of which 2 were more or less ready to go, and then go out and put it in front of a distributor. And I kind of had my eye on where we would take it and who I knew was looking for animation at that time. Because my argument at that time was, you know, feature animation is doing really well at the box office. There aren't very many people that know how to make it. These distributors are looking for content, etc. And that was true. It's all very different now, by the way. There are a lot more options, and that makes it harder to exist because Netflix, etc., has opened up the independent sector. But at that time, that was how it was. So I was looking to put together a slate, as I had done at Aardman, to go out and then get a deal on the basis that you would have a couple of projects vying for front run. One goes into production, the other one you then give more time to. Unfortunately, I then became ill. And so the plan changed because I spent months in chemo and surgery and all sorts of things. And so we had to kind of scale down. And I went out to LA, you know, within, I guess it was about 18 months, 2 years in, and the business plan said by then we needed to find a partner. And I literally went out after chemotherapy bald with a wig and pitched Paramount. And we only had one front-running film because I hadn't been there enough to get the slate up and running. And Paramount loved us and wanted to do a deal with us, but they wanted a different film, which was Ron. And that's why I then jumped on, because the quickest way to then go, okay, we'll do Ron first, was for me and Pete to write it. There's no getting to know you, no figuring out. It's just like, okay, here's the idea. Pete loved the idea. You know, that idea had kind of originally come from me. And so we just sat down and started work. And that's how it therefore came to be. So it took a bit longer to get to that first film, because we had a film with Chris Penn that was much more advanced. And he was going to direct it, you know, and that was the one on the blocks. But because, you know, you do what your distributor wanted, they wanted to change the order of production, and they wanted to start with what was then called MeBot. And that's so. And then it takes you 2 years maybe to write that, to develop the visual IP, you know. Takes a long time.
Oh, quite. And if I've got this right, I mean, your battles with battles is perhaps the wrong word, but your dealings with huge international conglomerates. If I'm following the route by which you got Ron's Gone Wrong ultimately distributed, you nearly signed with Paramount, then you went with Fox, then Disney bought Fox, then Disney dropped most of your slate, then you've sort of signed with Warner Brothers. Disney held on to Ron's Gone Wrong, and then you were in some I mean, it sounded like Disney actually kept some degree of faith with it from the outside looking in. But can you take me inside that tunnel?
It was even crazier than that, because, you know, we went out initially, me with my wig, and we pitched at that time the kind of possible buyers for what we were doing were Warner's, Paramount, STX, a couple of others. So we pitched all of those. Paramount were the most keen, although it took a change of regime there before they then said, let's do it. They did a slate deal with us. They wanted Ron first. And then we were developing Ron. And in the time that we then were developing the green light package, you know, with their investment, which was like a year or so, getting the first draft of the script, etc., the chairman, Brad Gray, was then removed and in fact died. And suddenly we had a green light package and no one there that could green light. And then Jim Giannopoulos came in, and he wanted to go a different route. So our very first green light pitch was to the first time that we'd stood in front of Jim, and they were like, no, this is not what we want to do, which is like the nightmare of animation. It takes so long that everyone changes, you know, changes seats. So that was a really sticky few weeks. And we went back with Liz about 3 or 4 weeks later, and we pitched the slate elsewhere, and we walked into Fox, and Stacey Snider just loved the film and everything that we were doing. And by the time we were walking off the studio lot, she was on the phone to Liz Murdoch saying, I want to pick up everything from this company and I want to make Ron. So we went from sort of disaster to triumph, which is always the way in animation. So then we were making with Fox. We loved those people. There were a lot of great execs there. We were very happy there. And then, like you say, Disney bought them in the middle. So then there was a question of, would everything move to somewhere else? At that point, Warner Brothers were looking to diversify what they were doing. And so, you know, we pitched everything to them. And then in the end, the agreement was, for all sorts of complicated reasons, that Disney would hold on to Ron and that other things would go to Warner's. And then, to be honest, it changed again after then, because I then put something together that has been sold elsewhere. Again, I think I'm not allowed to say, but I think it's announced, the project. It's a Richard Curtis pen script. With Simon also directing, but that's actually outside the Warner Brothers deal as well. So it's changed so much, Simon. It used to be, when I worked at Aardman with Amy and Michael, who I loved, by the way. I loved Amy Pascal. I thought she was brilliant. But they had been in post for like, I don't know, 9-10 years, and they had another 5-year contract. And Hollywood was these like empires of people that were there forever, and you knew where you were. And in the last few years, the pace of change and the pace at which, you know, I mean, Jim Giannopoulos is no longer at Paramount, right? These things are like happening at high speed. Plus, of course, streamers and so on. The entire model, if I was writing that business plan again, I know how to do that now. I would write it different now, because it's a different universe.
Going back to your roots as a storyteller and a story maker, as much as developing, did you find an awful lot of fun in those years, appreciating against the backdrop of very serious illness as well? Was there like I don't know, was there the whole exploring new world thing, or did you just want to get to tell your story?
No, I love that phase. I love that phase of like the sandbox. I mean, it's really hard, you know. I remember once getting off of a London to LA flight with Pete. We'd been on this flight for like 10 hours just trying to figure something out in the middle of Arthur, I think it was.
Yeah.
And he looked at me at the end, he went, oh, movies are so hot. You know, we used to, because he and I have done the whole gamut from an animated movie that takes 5 years. We used to do the Friday Night Armistice with Armando. We'd start writing on a Sunday in a rehearsal room, and we would write and rehearse all week, and then we would record the show on a Thursday night, and I would edit all night. I'd work all night long or whatever, and we'd edit it on the Friday, and then it went out on Friday evening, like, you know, an entire thing, half hour made in 1 week. And I've done that, and I've done 5 years. I had to send my some of my details of what I'd done through to Jill Coulton, you know, who's an animation director who's sponsoring me for a thing. And, you know, she said, give me all your CV and so on. And she went, wow, we really slowed you down. Look at all those things you used to do. And now animation, it's like, whoa, one every 3-4 years. But I do love the building process. It takes a lot of, it takes a lot of energy. You have to be totally self-starting, and you have to believe for the longest time, and you have to be prepared to go around in the weeds. And it is exhausting, you know, because there's nobody, like, you know, Pete and I are working on something at the moment, and there's no one there giving us a, you know, it's the opposite of when you're in production, when there's a very rigorous timetable that other people work out for you, and you just get stuff done all day, moving things forward. In development, you're living in this kind of going around space. At the same time, I love the story conversation. I love that piece.
We talked, we talked about the production of the film, the actual physical animation side, and the fact that just when you thought life might be getting a little bit easier, the world threw a pandemic at you and Zoom calls and things like that. Which is why I'm not zeroing specifically in on the film again this time around, just because I've done a little bit of that before. But I wonder if you can talk to, after jumping through these many hurdles, the point of release. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like the box office numbers and stuff like that. I just mean the point you've got it over the line, because you had a premiere at London Film Festival. I just wonder if you can encapsulate what that feeling was like at the end of such a dramatic journey.
Well, you know, there is something that happens at that point. And, you know, I've been in that place before, and I think it's interesting because, you know, JP, who is directing with me, hasn't been in that place before. And Pete said to me, oh, I never actually think about that usually, although this time around he said he did. But for me, it's something which I hold in my head and my heart through 4 years of struggle. And that is when you have a connection with an audience. And I've really felt it strongly over the years with Arthur Christmas. I don't think I felt it immediately when Arthur was released. But over the years, because it's a Christmas film and it's been shown on so many different places, people find that film, and you hear from people what a film means to them. And that is an incredible experience and an incredible feeling. And one of the things about making animation, which is really interesting and enjoyable, is that you go through phases of relationships. So in the early days, at the beginning, you're really in with a writer. That's your relationship, is you're writing, and, you know. And then your relationship becomes mostly strongly with story artists and an editor. And those are the people you're spending all your time with and thinking with, you know, and artist design. And then gradually it moves through the, you know, digital team, etc. And you become incredibly engaged with your animators for about 1.5 years, you know, and then you move again, and then you're in with your post-production team and you live with those people for weeks, and you have all these phases of relationships. And I love that. It's really enjoyable going through, and each time you want to honor the work that's gone before by making sure that this bit is good. And that's partly why I'm such a bloody hard ass, because I'm like, we spent ages on that in story, you've got to make that right in animation, you know. So I'm always kind of holding the bar up. But also there comes a new place after all that where your relationship is with an audience, and that more than anything is why I'm so, you know, I drive so hard for the best possible quality I can get, because I want an audience to feel. And, you know, one of the amazing things that happened to me after Arthur Christmas, when I started Locksmith, that Aardman forwarded a letter to me that they had received from a mum who said, I've always loved Christmas, it's my big thing, and I couldn't wait to have a child so I could share Christmas with them. but my child's autistic and has never got it, never understood it until he discovered Arthur Christmas. And because of that movie that he now knows backwards, he knows everything about it, he fell in love with Christmas. And it is a joy. And honestly, Simon, for that one thing alone makes it feel worth everything. And that sounds really cheesy, but I genuinely feel
no, it doesn't at all. Doesn't at all.
And I got sent a picture of a little boy, a 6-year-old, who'd seen Ron, loved it. First of all, a picture of him with the bebop that he designed with a big grin on his face, super cute. But then his mum said he's scared of the dark, and she'd ordered him the toy that is the light up Ron, like a nightlight, like in the movie. And she sent me a picture of him just asleep, just cuddling that light up Ron. And it means that everything you were thinking about, because to me, it started with wanting to make a film that my kid would have a feeling about. And then you see it in that other kid, that they feel about your character, and everything falls away at that point. You know, all the sort of, you know, everything that all the crazy times, all the fact that Brad Gray's no longer at Paramount, you know, all the terrible despairs and joys that you have go. And suddenly your relationship is with an audience, is with the people who are seeing your film.
See, for all you get for all the emotion in that answer there, I've got a bone to pick with you, because I saw the film again for a second time over the weekend, and I showed it to my children. One of them just went straight onto the online shop and has given me a bloody list of things that they want to buy from the film. So
there you go.
You know,
emotion in the service of commerce.
I tell you, there's a lovely analogy. I mean, I've got kids. There's a lovely analogy that I was told when it was my second kid, whereby with your first child, you sterilize everything. With the second child, you run everything under a hot tap. With the third child, you let the dog lick it clean. You just said that you're a bit of a hard ass, your words. What do you learn from second time directing that you didn't get from first? What do you not see coming? I still think you sterilize everything. I get that sense from you.
Yeah, no, I was a tiny bit more laid back. The people working on it would be like, what the heck? But I was, because the first time out, everything has equal weight. You know, you can bleep this out, but it's what my lovely VFX soup Doug called pixel fucking, you know, where you see every single thing and you give equal weight in a way. And I think one of the things you learn a tiny bit of is what to weight more when, you know, there are things that you go, that isn't the most important thing. But having said that, animation is the art of the detail. It has the illusion of perfectibility. In other words, if you made every decision correctly, it would be perfect. But of course, no human can make every decision correctly. And there are still always things, even though you were able, you know, I can decide what shape someone's nostrils are, you know, and therefore in your head, I guess it's like an artist starting a painting. In theory, if you did it right, it would be exactly as you saw it. But it can't be, because there's lots of humanity and circumstance and time and money in the way, you know. And so though I think you learn a little more of that stuff. And I did delegate a little more of these things, but you know, in terms of what matters for story, you know, it matters, and the detail where it counts, you know, it is in the end. It's very difficult to say how many details you can drop and the film still has its impact. You know, what's the line in perfectionism which you can drop and it still means something? It's not a risk you want to take when it's 4 or 5 years of your life, you know.
And it's your name on the door in this case as well.
Well,
yeah. Well, I interviewed Glenn Keane once, who, I mean, I grew up looking at so much of his animated work in Disney movies, and he gave a slightly different version of that, because he said he looks for asymmetry. He just said he finds that it's almost like he finds the perfection and then just skews it slightly. I think his exact phrase was asymmetry is beautiful. And I just wonder if you start, because I see like the slight rough edges of the world. I mean, you've said when you were developing Ron's Gone Wrong that it was accepting that kids write what playing Grand Theft Auto and watching The Walking Dead, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise, and we shouldn't like curve every corner perfectly. I'm just wondering how you counterbalance that a little bit. It sounds like there's two different things in your head there.
Well, I think we're talking about different kinds of perfectionism.
Yeah, slightly.
Because,
Yes, I get that.
Glenn is capable of the most utterly perfect animation, and he's probably talking about that touch of humanity that you put in it. Whereas, I don't claim to be in Glenn's league as an animation director. And for me, it's the perfectionism in the story and the story detail, and how much is seen and how much adds up to your final, the impact that it makes. That's what I mean, really. It's like, when do you let it go? When you go, that scene isn't quite right, or, I can't let those things go, really. It's a bit of an exhausting thing. And I think all people that work in animation, I mean, again, it comes back to that thing of, you've got to honor what everyone else has put into it. When hundreds of people have poured so much of their life into it, you can't just go, well, that doesn't really work, but nah, whatever, because it's not just you letting that go. You know what I mean? You feel an obligation to try and keep the standards up for everybody.
Now, at this point, I should interject, as you can probably guess that this conversation was recorded over Zoom. Zoom is not short of technical problems, and this was where one kicked in. So I'm just explaining this little mini break in there. Now, the conversation is going to pick up reasonably abruptly, just by the way that the recording went, just to set up the next and final part of this conversation. Sarah is now no longer with Locksmith Animation. She's moved on. She's developing other projects with Peter Bainham. So that's where my question went at that point, to kind of find out what she's up to now and what we can look forward to. So back over to her.
I don't really want to be, it's very easy as a person who writes things or, makes things. You feel like you're the chicken in the battery farm that produces the eggs that make the omelets that is the industry, but you really do feel like you're the sort of work, you can very easily feel like the work for hire. And like a lot of people, what I'm trying to find is a world in which I can create that work, but benefit from it, have some kind of control over that world, what that world feels like, is just find that sort of universe to work in where it's not, this work that you do, that you put so much. I think come on, lots and lots of people have to, do the equivalent of factory work, right? And it's not like it's working down a mine, so let's not be too sorry for ourselves. But it is true that when you're doing this kind of work, you invest so much of yourself and of your emotion and your heart and your soul in it, and you care far, far more about than is healthy about your job and the work that you're doing, because it means so much of your personal self is wrapped up in it. And when you put that much into something, I think, you really want a world which feels like you can create your own space to do that in. And I'm still trying to figure that out. I did try and set that up within Locksmith, but then I took on the obligation of a lot of other kind of things that I needed to deliver for other people because of the scale of that, operation. And, that was kind of, I couldn't juggle with that at the same time. So I'm trying to figure out how and where I can do that. Well, I have some ideas, Simon. Don't get me wrong.
I don't doubt that.
Pete and I are working on a thing, and I love that. That's the best place to be. That's my absolute happy place, is working on a thing with Pete. And I'm figuring out a setup of how I can do that work in a place that feels like, the utopian version. Maybe there isn't a utopian version, right? Maybe that's
there isn't. There isn't. I mean, I don't want to interrupt what you're saying, but there just isn't. It's, I mean, no. By this, you seem, and this is me, the outside looking in. You seem to have striven for a perfection that doesn't exist for a very long time.
You're probably right, and I think one of the things I've become incredibly aware of in the last year or so is the incredible division there is between the people that make the things that in the end create the money that employs all of the other people, and those other people who are operating in an industry. There's such a division. If I can make right a beautiful film that everyone loves, and it can, if it doesn't hit at the box office, that massively affects my future. But the people that actually put it in the world is one of 10 other films that they're marketing. Doesn't affect them in the same way at all. And yet the thing that the creative people do is what sustains the other side of the industry, right? There is no industry. There are no jobs for distributors unless there's something to distribute. And yet the people who do the work, that creates the thing that the people distribute, that is, there's an enormous amount of risk and difficulty and sacrifice in that the other side of the industry doesn't have to it doesn't have to engage with. They have jobs that are like proper sensible jobs that they can do and then go home from. And I've really become aware of that. And I think what I do have a lot of, I have some ideas and talent and skill about the kind of commercial operation of the side of it and so on. And I suppose you get tempted to be drawn into that in order to try and create a better world for the creators. But actually, the truth is, like everybody else, I find that it's incredibly difficult to juggle those two sides.
Yeah, I mean, I've stopped asking people about box office response to film, because ever since it was a comment from Richard Curtis. He said a few years ago, I think. I can't remember who it was I was interviewing, but someone had said, Richard Curtis said to them that if someone comes and talks to your film 6 months after it's been released, they've never got anything but nice things to say, because that's out of that window of the box office. That's about someone's personal response to that film. And by the sounds of it, you completely had that with Arthur.
I've totally had that with Arthur, because it's been seen it has been so widely seen on so many different platforms, because Christmas gives a reason for someone to pick it up every single year. I'm very, I look forward to that future with Ron. Unfortunately, Ron was sort of thrown into the sort of foreground of the pandemic, motorway, as it were. And, it still, families are only just beginning to come back to the cinema. And obviously Ron suffered a little bit from that. But on the other hand, it's about to land on Disney Plus. And, in a way, we're lucky. We had some theatrical opportunity. There are other Disney Pixar movies that went straight to Disney Plus. So at least we had some of the cinema experience, and now we'll have a life on Disney Plus. And I really hope that over time, that people find it. I mean, I want it. I care a lot that the film is a worthwhile commercial enterprise for the people that invested in it. That really matters. It's their money, and I want to honor that, and I want to see them do well out of it. But I also really just want kids to find it.
Yeah, I watched it with my kids over the weekend, and utterly beguiled by it. Utterly beguiled by it. You don't make bad films, really, Sarah, if you don't mind me saying.
Thank you, Simon.
I seem to have watched it. You've made two, and I seem to have watched both of them quite a lot of times now. So thank you for not making them rubbish, just from one parent to another.
I'll try and hold on to that.
If you can hold,
the next one's rubbish.
Yeah, I write poster quotes as a rule. It's just
I might get to make a few more quickly if I'm not also trying to set up giant corporations.
Well, that's where I'm ending up, really. I mean, I presume you're back to storytelling. You're back to that absolute core love in your heart, and that's going to be your immediate future.
Yes, absolutely. And Pete and I are on Zoom every afternoon coming up with the next thing. And as I say, that is my absolute happy place. I love working with Pete. We have so much shared, so much shared. And, we did an interview the other day, and Henry Jackman was on it, our composer. And he said a really lovely thing about the movie that, he said, well, it's not what you expect of a British film. No. Yes, it has that sort of quirky, offbeat humor, but it takes you to this proper big time emotional resolution. And when he said it, I remember Harry Gregson Williams saying exactly the same thing about Arthur. When he saw the third act, because he came in very late and did it very quickly, the music, and when he saw the third act, he went, I didn't see that coming. It crept up on me, and it really got to him. And he said, so many movies might have sidestepped that or undercut it or whatever, and you really went there. And I thought, that is very me and Pete. Both of those films have that, is that, yes, we do the sort of, well, people say it's edgy humor. I mean, it's literally just what makes us laugh. But we also share this big sort of love of big emotional stories about kids and families and people. We love that. We love the big thing that makes you cry, as well as the jokes. And so I think we've both been very touched by the response to Ron, to think, we make things that people care about, and that's a really lovely thing. So we want to try and get a wiggle on and do a couple more before we're way, way too old.
Well, I mean, I hope you do. If I even began to think how you got all this done, I think my poor balding head would just lose what few follicles it had remaining, to be honest. I'm just glad you did it. And when you first mentioned what you were going to do with Locksmith, I remember just sat there just saying, that sounds insane, brilliant. And then you did it, and I still don't know how you've done it. And I suspect whatever you've got coming next is going to be similarly insane, and all power to you for
Well,
it.
I really hope that Locksmith, Locksmith's making another lovely film that I was, instrumental in setting up and creating, that I'm very proud of. There are also projects, that I've left there that I also think are fantastic, and I'm sure they'll go on to do those. So I really hope that there is, a continued turnover of British production, because that's good for all of us. And what I see happening now is that, a bit like happened with the visual effects industry after Harry Potter, as that work starts coming, more and more people are getting in the game, and therefore that makes London exactly what I wanted, whether it's inside or outside Locksmith. What I really wanted was for London to be a place where one could make these films, and that's what I'll do, so they will continue, and I'm very proud of that legacy, and I will do my thing, where I can just get my hands dirty.
Sarah Smith, I'm glad you exist. Thank you for letting me hopelessly overrun as well. Thank you. And that was the end of my conversation with Sarah. I can't thank her enough for her candour and for speaking so openly about her life and career. Ron's Gone Wrong, if you've not had the pleasure, really is a treat. It is on Disney Plus now. It is on DVD. It is on Blu-ray. It is well worth seeking out. It'll be interesting to see how it gets on in the upcoming BAFTA race. And that notwithstanding, I think just like Arthur Christmas, it's one of those films that's just going to endure. And I've seen it twice so far, and I've got this feeling I might be going back for a third run fairly soon. Which all brings me to the end of this special episode of Film Stories. If you want more from us, you can find it at filmstories.co.uk. That's the website where all sorts of movie mayhem going on there. I'm on Twitter at Simon Brew. Film Stories is on Twitter at FilmStoriesPod. And you can buy our magazines at store.filmstories.co.uk and support this podcast if you'd like to at patreon.com/Simon Brew. I'll be back soon with your regular episode of Film Stories. The most important thing, as always, is you all stay safe and well, and you look after yourselves. You all take care. I'll be back soon with more Film Stories. Until then, bye-bye.